Hi there, it's Dr. Chung. Today I'm going to go over some of the main topics I usually go over at the 2-month-old well child check. At this age, a child typically feeds approximately 5 to 8 times per day, and that's a general guide. And some children might be outliers that feed a little bit more frequently than that or gain weight well feeding less than that, but that's the typical range is feeding approximately 5 to 8 times per day. And it'll vary depending on the personality of your child, how frequently they want to feed, and how much they're able to feed at one time, depending on how fast their stomach is getting bigger. And it will just vary from child to child, depending on what schedule your child is on and how they're sleeping. As a newborn, when they're not that vigorous and efficient with feeding, we explain to give them more time at the breast initially until they do become more efficient, which was approximately 15 to 20 minutes each breast. And as your child gets older, usually they do become more efficient. And with good milk production, they commonly don't need to feed as long. So the duration can be shorter, and there doesn't need to be a specific number of minutes that you target. And you can breastfeed your child for that session, just depending on their hunger cues until they seem not hungry anymore, they're turning away, or just seem disinterested. If you're bottle feeding, or if you're doing some bottle feeding, then the rough estimate of what a 2-month-old will take at one time is approximately anywhere from 3 to 6 ounces at a time, which works out to 90 to 180 milliliters at a time. And again, those aren't specific numbers that you have to stay within, but just a rough guide for reference. And there is a chart that outlines these numbers that I'm quoting from a nutrition feeding article in the journal Pediatrics in Review, and I will try to include some graphics of that for reference as needed. As far as the sleep schedule, like I had mentioned when I went over the topics for the 1 month well child checks, a child can be sleep trained anytime after approximately 6 weeks old. They have the mental capacity to learn sleep training habits 6 weeks old or older. So if you haven't already, you can start some of the main concepts of sleep training, such as doing a sleep routine. And then even though it takes some crying, a child falls asleep on their own at bedtime, soothe themselves to sleep so that if they wake up shortly thereafter, when you're hoping they'll sleep at least 5 to 6 hours, then they would have had practice falling asleep on their own. And again, if you're hoping that they'll sleep at least 5 to 6 hours and they wake up 2 hours later after bedtime, then it's not emotionally harmful for you to let your infant cry, see if they'll suck on their hand, find some way to soothe themselves back to sleep, even though it takes a certain amount of fussing and crying. And avoiding during these early awakenings, avoiding rocking your child back to sleep or feeding your child back to sleep so that they get trained during this stretch of night. Just because I cry, I'm not getting these kind of enjoyable things from mom or dad. And they learn that they have to go back to sleep on their own. So with that sleep training, usually children can sleep approximately 5 to 6 hours through the night without needing to feed. And again, some children may be able to go longer than that, but we say for a 2-month-old, continue to feed at least 5 times per 24 hours. And as long as you're doing that, feeding at least 5 to 6 times per 24 hours, then you have some flexibility. And if your child is growing well and gaining weight well up until that time, letting them sleep more than 6 hours, if they let you, might be okay. The data shows that by 4 months old, about half of children can sleep 6 to 8 hours through the night without needing to feed. And by 8 months old, half of children can sleep approximately 8 to 10 hours through the night without needing to feed. So just to give you some benchmarks about what to expect. As a reminder regarding tummy time, we say try to do at least 15 to 30 minutes of cumulative tummy time per day by this age. And it's up to you how you split that up or how many times a day you divide that into. And if your child is doing some spit up, then that's not necessarily abnormal. Spit ups or reflux usually peak from 2 to 6 months old. because the child isn't eating solid foods yet. Their stomach is not as big as it will be later. They're not really sitting up. And the junction between the esophagus and stomach doesn't get tighter until usually around 6 months old. So some amount of spit up is normal. And if it's slightly more than it was over previous weeks, again, not necessarily abnormal. And we would consider it more significant if there was inadequate weight gain issues or some symptoms of severe heartburn or discomfort due to the reflux, which isn't that common. So just wanted to mention that some amount of spit up is not necessarily abnormal for this age. And at the 2-month-old checkup is usually when we give the first full set of vaccines for infants. So at our site, the standard vaccines we give are 1 oral vaccine and 2 injections. So the oral vaccine is the first of 3 doses of the oral rotavirus vaccine that we squirt into your child's mouth, and that helps prevent that diarrheal illness. And when we do that oral vaccine, if your child is on a full stomach, it increases the likelihood that they'll spit up after we give that dose in the office. So if you're planning to feed your child, we recommend doing it after the appointment rather than right before. And the first injection to mention is a Prevnar 20 is the brand name, or pneumococcal 20 valent vaccine. And that vaccine helps prevent conditions due to that bacteria, pneumococcus. So it helps prevent bloodstream infections, meningitis, and pneumonia. So a very important vaccine that we give into the child's thigh. And the second and last injection at our site is a combination vaccine called Vaxelis. And there's 4 total vaccines combined into that one injection, just to make it more comfortable for the child and so they can receive less injections. So in that Vaxelis, the 4 vaccines that's combined into that injection are DTaP, which is diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. That pertussis is whooping cough. Polio, HIB, which is Haemophilus influenza type B, and that vaccine also prevents bloodstream infections and meningitis. And the 4th component of that combination vaccine is another round of hepatitis B. And it'll be, for most infants, the second round of hepatitis B because they would have gotten the first dose in the nursery. But certain infants, if you've chosen not to give that vaccine, then it'll be their first of 3 doses. So oral rotavirus vaccine, pneumococcus shot, and then the second shot has all 4 of those vaccines combined into it: DTaP, polio, HIB, and hepatitis B. And all of these vaccines, there will be second and third rounds of these at the 4-month-old checkup and at the 6-month-old checkup. But after the first round of these vaccines, after 2 weeks has passed, then your child still will have a certain amount of protection against these conditions. After the 2-month-old checkup, then the next checkup is a 4-month-old checkup. And of course, for these well child checks, we cater the scheduling to the needs of your child. So if your child might need something in between, then we'll gladly discuss the options and plan accordingly. Thanks, everyone. The next video will be about the topics I usually go over at the 4-month-old checkup. Bye now.